Hello there, it's the 27th of November. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh. This is Renew Every Morning and welcome along. Well now, we have climbed our Mount Agapé, haven't we? And over the last few weeks we've been working on the content of Paul's thoughts around, well, frankly, trying to explain that which cannot be explained, trying to know that which cannot be known, because the truth of the matter is this idea of love is so extraordinary, so beyond us, so much bigger than we are, or they're just but feeble attempts. But I wanted to try perhaps to do a couple of things before I've resolved the book, when I'm going to talk to you about what I call Happily Ever After, which is going to lay out the case for people that might still be thinking about the issue of insecurity around their salvation. I'm going to lay that out for you in ways I hope that you'll never ever ask the question again about. But this idea of just the ascent of Agapé, I think, is so important. We've looked at over the last few days this sort of four movements, four movements really, about love's nature and the necessity of how it's built. And so I kind of would like to think about this as sort of these final couple of bits, as a bit more sort of meditations really, just thinking them through. And those four motions, those four movements were about restraint, sort of regard and relationship, resilience, and this idea of radicality. And this is, I think, is such an interesting idea because love is not a kind of virtue amongst virtues. Love is the very life of God expressed. God is love. I mean, that's an emphatic statement, right? God is love. If it's love, it's God. Now, of course, a lot of what we call love doesn't pass pass the muster. A lot of what we call God isn't God, and a lot of things that we think are God are not love. But true love, as we've seen it expressed here in the words, I say it's so inadequate. But nonetheless, I hope it's brought you to some sort of consensus around how magnificent this is. So this is the idea of this life of God that's expressed in every human soul. It's not learned, really. It's not something that we can teach you. It's something that has to be revealed. It's not something that you can achieve. It's not an acquisitive acquisition as such. It's just something that has to be allowed. And Paul's hymn, and it is a hymn in 1 Corinthians 13, is really, it's not arbitrary. It's a kind of map of transformation, a four-movement ascent deep into the mind of Christ. And each movement, it seems to me, unveils a deeper dimension of what love is, how love acts, and why love alone endures when everything else collapses. So you'll remember that first movement was about restraint. Key things: love God is patient, love God is kind, love God cannot envy, love God cannot boast. Patient, kind, cannot envy, cannot boast. Now that we bundled that together and talked about that being about love speaks to us of its restraint. Now, importantly, I didn't say repression, but this is much more to do with a kind of holy self-governance, I suppose. God is patient and kind. That's just a fact. And the thing about these things is they're immutable. They're irreducible. They're not subject to change. These are fixed, constant ideas about God. It carries no demand whatsoever to be gratified, no urgency to be obeyed, and it absolutely steadfastly refuses to force, to coerce, or to manipulate. That's it. So Paul has to begin here because that's where love begins. When you're trying to think about the nature of God, it must begin with the notion of love does no harm. So to say love is patient is to say love is safe and sound, right? And that, I think, is just a beautiful idea. You see, what's so powerful about love is love has nothing to defend because love has nothing to fear. Do you know, I know that when I'm at my most defensive, I'm normally at my most fearful. That's true of relationships, situations. I can remember when I first started teaching about the grace message, I would really be dogged in my arguments about it. But after a while, I didn't feel the need to defend it because no, I don't fear whether you believe it or not. The great truth is, and this is the amazing thing about God. God is love, and it's not love because you believe it. Whether you believe it or not, is God's still love. I always remember that line in the Matrix trilogy where Morpheus says to, I think it's to Neo, where he says, not everybody believes what you believe. And he says, well, the beautiful thing about what I believe is you don't have to believe it for it to be true. I just wish you would, because what it would do for you would be amazing. So then Paul kind of removes all these shadows. So he says, well, not only does it not defend itself, it can't envy. It can't boast. Can you imagine? Sometimes we think God can do everything. No, he can't. He can't be envious and he can't be boastful. You see, envy says, what is yours should be mine. That's not a God thing. Love doesn't do that. Boasting says, what's mine proves I'm more than you. Do you see? And those concepts are so insane to even think that they would be love concepts. They can't be love concepts. How could a love concept be what's yours should be mine and what's mine proves I'm more than you? That doesn't make sense, right? But so both of these really reveal more the signature of the egoic self-life. And remember, the ego, simply put, is the belief that we're separate from God. And that brings with it this kind of compulsive need to take, to compare, to compete, to evaluate. It's so exhausting. Don't you know that? It's so tiring. But love doesn't do that. It doesn't do either. It just gives. Just gives. It's a restraint. This idea of restraint is not weakness, it's strength. The strength to withhold the ego's impulse so the spirit's intention can be revealed. And that's the problem, that our ego intentions are so loud, are so eclipsing. I was thinking today of trying to build on the lovely Clem Blanchard with his ego edging God out. And I was thinking actually ego might be at a more mystical level, literally eclipsing God's oneness. And that's what the ego does. It eclipses God's oneness. And it's noisy and it's loud. But that restraint phase just kind of clears the air, which then moves us into this kind of regard relationship phase. So God is not proud. He's proud of you, of course, but he's not proud, not rude, not self-seeking, not easily angered. And then this extraordinary statement, keeps no records of wrong. God doesn't keep score. What? No, he doesn't keep score. Oh my goodness gracious me, if you knew. I mean, I was raised as a Catholic and I used to go to confession every Saturday evening before I went to church, because you couldn't go to church to take communion unless you've been to confession. And as you tell me you went to confession, you feel like they were kind of rubbing out something in the ledger for you. Oh, thank God for that. But of course, by the time you came back next week, you'd have a whole new stack of stuff in the ledger. No. God is not a scorekeeper. God is not a bookkeeper. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. So if restraint, that first phase, is love refusing to harm, regard is love choosing to honour. You see, this movement concerns how love sees. It's kind of this beautifully purified perception that refuses to weaponize superiority, mood, memory, or entitlement. No. Now just hear these nots and doesn't for a second. Love is not proud. Because you see, pride requires hierarchy. And that is not a love concept. Love is about equity. Love is not rude. Why? Because rudeness is the ego's attempt to assert power. Now, we talked about rudeness being the unfinishedness, and I'd refer you to that that particular talk, but just at the most basic level, the ego is always trying to assert power. Love is not self-seeking. This is important because love always is self for others. It's never self for self. Love's a self-giver, not a self-getter. Love is not provoked. Why? Because, you see, the ego is always complaining that the world isn't serving it. That's not a God concept. And crucially, love keeps no record of wrong. None whatsoever, because it refuses to convert the past into a weapon. It won't do that. It won't do that. So the place really where we're standing here is very, very holy ground. The ego remembers to punish, never forgets to punish, but the spirit remembers to liberate. So regard is the mind of Christ looking through our eyes, the refusal to reduce another person to their behavior, their season, or their worst moment. It's not, it's the holy insistence, if you like, that the image of God is in you, is the truth of you. And that brings us to this third movement, this resilience, where we see it bears, it believes, it hopes, it endures. If restraint protects love from harm, and regard elevates love to honour, resilience empowers love to remain and remain steadfast. And this movement really concerns durability, I guess. It's not naive optimism, it's not kind of emotional stoicism, but something more divine, really. Something, this kind of unbreakable nature of love. It bears all things. It's not to absorb abuse. It's to carry the reality without just collapsing under the weight of it. It's the strength of Christ. This is happening, but this is not me. It believes all things isn't gullibility, it's vision. It's seeing the God potential in every person and possibility. Ego believes in the past. Love believes in the present is possible. It hopes all things. That's not wishfulness, of course. That's an eschatological imagination, the refusal to let the story end where the pain says it ends. It kind of, hope denies the darkness the last word. It won't allow it. And it endures all things. It's not a grinding survival. It's divine steadfastness. Love endures because love's eternal. And only what is real can endure. And together, these four kind of facets form this kind of shimmering diamond of this third movement. The love that cannot be bent out, shaped by the world, because it belongs to the one who shapes the world. And then finally, this idea of love never fails. And this is our pinnacle. The final moment, it's like the crescendo. The moment Paul stops describing love and just reveals its nature. Love never fails. It's the most radical claim in Scripture, because this is it's not about morality, it's about ontology. Love never fails. Why? Because love is God. God is eternal, and the eternal cannot fail. Everything else, prophecy, tongues, knowledge, institutions, gifts, all of that will pass away. But love alone will be standing when everything else has fallen. Ego fails because ego is illusion. But love never ever fails because love is real. Never fails doesn't mean always gets its way. It means always accomplish what it intends, whether or not the outcome resembles our desire. Sometimes love looks like presence, sometimes boundary, sometimes courage, sometimes surrender. But in every form, love is victorious. Love's radicality is not this extremity, but its ultimacy. In the end, when the striving's done, when the fear has burned itself out, when what remains, or forgiveness has done its work, what remains? Love, nothing else. The ascent is complete. Love restrains harm. Love regards dignity. Love remains resilient. Love reveals the ultimate. That's it. The ascent, though, having called it ascent for all these days, isn't upward. It's inward. Not away from the world, but towards the world, in a final healing. Well, in the final analysis, the radical claim holds the real key and the real goal of the gospel of leadership and of life is to heal the world through a love that never fails. All right. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.